All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us today for the Educational Transformation 2020 presentation, Rethinking Rubric Design. My name is Jill DeFranco, and I'm on the training and support team here at Hawks Learning. Our speaker today is Professor Gregory Ramirez. Professor Ramirez was born, raised, and currently resides in Fresno, California with his wife, Stephanie, and their 2 children. He has taught full-time at Madera Community College since 2008. Mr. Ramirez has also presented or co-presented at conferences in Portland, Oregon, Atlanta, Georgia, Irvine, California, San Diego, California, and Sacramento, California. He is currently pursuing the Doctor of Arts programs in English Pedagogy at Murray State University in Kentucky. We are so excited that Professor Ramirez is here to share his experience and insight with us today. We do have a large audience and will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Kristen Gantz of Hawks, a member of our training and support team, is also joining us in the background of the webinar today. She is here to answer any questions throughout the webinar, so please enter those in the Q&A as we go, and she will write back to you. If you have any questions specifically for Professor Ramirez, we'll save those for the end of the presentation. On that note, I'll hand it over to you, Professor Ramirez.
Okay, thank you, Jill, and thank you, Kristen, and good afternoon, everyone. My name, again, is Gregory Ramirez, and the webinar that I am presenting on today, as it says here, is Rethinking Rubric Design. Now, I just thought I'd go ahead and spend a quick time going through the agenda right here of what we're going to go ahead and cover. I'll have a little introduction right here, which, you know, was both kind of given just now by Jill, but also I'll kind of give that in the with this slide and the next slide as well. Opinions about rubrics, it'll be something that we'll go ahead and cover, and then we'll go ahead and evaluate some rubrics as well right here, and we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end or after I'm done presenting here. And so the outcomes of this particular presentation, by the end of this presentation, attendees will be able to do the following: identify merits in the debate of rubric use, distinguish alterations to one instructor's rubrics, and determine best practices for rubric use. And so before I get into the next slide, you know, this is part of my introduction right here. There may be some of you wondering how I got onto this right here, what made me want to go ahead and present on this particular topic. I believe many of us do use rubrics in some capacity, or we're encouraged to use rubrics in some capacity. And then also, given that I am, as was mentioned earlier, in the Doctor of Arts program in English Pedagogy at Murray State University, which is in Kentucky, I am, one of my core classes was an assessment. And so what you're seeing here is is based on the final project that I did, which was focusing on rubrics. And so I figure what I could go ahead and do is to go ahead and get started into this and just kind of bring this into the discussion right here. Here's a quotation. This is from W. James Popham. And so you're going to see a few slides with some quotations right here. This is the part that kind of relates to the debates and the opinions about rubrics here. But this particular quotation is from his essay, What's Wrong and What's Right with Rubrics. And I should point out that with the ones that I'm referencing, I believe you should be able to have access to this PowerPoint afterwards. Towards the end of this PowerPoint, I do have a works cited page, so if you wanted to look at the scholarship for yourself for any reason, you should be able to research that without any problem. But this particular first one right here, which mentions the origins, this quotation reads as follows: measurement specialists who scored students' compositions began to use the term rubric to describe the rules that guided their scoring. They could have easily employed a more readily comprehensible descriptor such as scoring guide, but scoring guide lacked adequate opacity. So you see right there with Popham opening it up right there, talking about the idea that, you know, where rubric originated, where the terminology originated that we've become accustomed to, And then also kind of saying that even though we've become accustomed to using the word rubric, it may not be as specific, or it may not be as accurate in describing what we're doing as what it is intended to do right here. But it at least kind of tells us where we get the idea of the word rubric from. Now, I should point out that there's a difference between holistic and analytic rubrics right here. And this is something that Craig A. Mertler goes ahead and distinguishes for us right here with this particular quotation that we see. It says, a holistic rubric requires the teacher to score the overall process or product as a whole without judging the component parts separately. In contrast with an analytic rubric, the teacher scores separate individual parts of the product or performance first, then sums the individual scores to obtain a total score. Okay, so, again, many of us would probably be familiar with rubrics because, like I said, we've been encouraged to use them. If we've been told in a standardized form, if they had been passed down to us, they were probably passed down to us in a holistic format right there. We may have even gotten them in terms of an analytical format, just depending, but my guess is that we might be more familiar with holistic if they've been passed down to us. And whether we teach, if any of you teach K through 12, or, if you've, I know for myself, I have the experience with having been a reader for the AP composition exam, and I'm going to reference that a little bit later. But I know that they use a holistic rubric themselves in terms of the scoring. Now, this particular one right here that we have is in terms of objectivity versus subjectivity. This particular quotation that comes from Vicky Spandl in Defense of Rubrics, because there's the idea of, well, do rubrics really give objectivity, or are they merely subjective because of the person who's grading it, whoever hands they happen to be in? But this particular quotation reads as follows: no teacher I know believes that rubrics make us totally objective. The good news is that subjectivity is not wrong or even harmful, unless we do it as an excuse not to make our scores or grades defensible. We do need to offer reasons for our reactions to writing and to show that those reasons are based on sound criteria. So Spandl, as you can see with this particular quotation right here, is pretty much offering the idea that, it's just going to be subjective no matter whose hands it's in, but subjectivity itself is not a bad thing as long as it can be justified in terms of the particular conclusion or conclusions that the scorer or the person or the teacher is able to come to there. Now, this this next one right here relates to the idea of standardization. You would see right here with Asalbi Inouye, who happens to be who's a professor out at Arizona State University. He was actually he was a professor at CSU Fresno, aka Fresno State, which is where I earned my bachelor's and master's degrees, although he was not a professor there at the time when I graduated. And so I never took any one of his courses. But standardization right here, it mentions right here that according to Asalbi Inouye right here from this particular chapter that's titled The Function of Race in Writing Assessments, he says that procedures and rubrics are designed to label and categorize student performances in uniform ways, which means they identify sameness, not surprises or difference. So in his case right there, he's making the argument that basically rubrics are a form of standardization, and standardization is not a good thing, is what he's coming to the conclusion of right there, or he's arguing largely because of the idea of sameness, that, no two writers are the same, no two students are the same. So that would be his justification for, not using rubrics right there, in the idea that there's that sort of wanting to go ahead and just looking at how they're similar, but not rewarding the fact that there might be differences, or not rewarding any kind of surprises that might come up in terms of the essay that that a student might be submitting. Now, just recently, I had the chance to finish the book by Joe Feldman titled Grading for Equity. And so I know equity is probably something that, we're hearing a lot about, especially those of us, and at least I know I myself am hearing a lot about, being a community college instructor. There's a lot of discussion about equity right here. And so Joe Feldman would have a different opinion than Asalbi Inouye in this case right here, because he says rubrics equip students to self-assess and even to peer assess work, empowering them not only to know exactly what grade they will get, but exactly what to improve in order to earn a higher grade. And so one other thing that he mentions in relation to rubrics is that it sort of lifts the veil between the instructor and the student. That way, the student would be able to understand better why it is that he or she earned a particular grade on a written assessment right there. So that's why he's encouraging the use of rubrics and saying that rubrics are basically a tool of equity right there, or can promote equity, if you will. And then finally, what I thought I'd do is go ahead and share this particular analogy right here, which you'll see two quotations from two individuals. The first one is from Alfie Kohn. And you'll see that in his quotation right here, he says the following, that rubrics are above all a tool to promote standardization. So there we are again, we see the word standardization right there. To turn teachers into grading machines, or at least allow them to pretend that what they are doing is exact and objective. So we see the word standardization, and then we see the words objective again, words that we had seen in previous quotations right there. And so, Alfie Kohn is basically saying that the idea of standardization is what we're seeing with rubrics, as well as the idea of, as what he says, he calls it pretending to be exact and objective. So, the idea that it's not truly, exact and objective right there in terms of what, a score or what a teacher would be doing who happens to have the rubric, or happens to be utilizing the rubric right there. Michael Livingston goes ahead and counters this specific analogy that he uses right here, because Alfie Kohn refers to rubrics as being a tool, but this is Michael Livingston's response to this particular idea that Alfie Kohn is promoting, because he writes this. He says rubrics are no more to blame for that kind of problem than the hammer is to blame for me striking my thumb. So, he goes ahead and turns around and says that, if you're going to go ahead and say that it's a tool, while certainly it can be a tool, but it's not anyone's fault if it's creating these particular effects right here that, Alfie Kohn is going ahead and saying with that particular quotation that we have. So hopefully kind of looking at the debate and seeing kind of the pros and the cons of rubrics is kind of a good place to put ourselves and to situate ourselves right now as we are about to move forward here. In fact, what we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at different rubrics from one particular instructor, and that instructor is me. I'm going to go ahead and share some rubrics that I have done over the years of teaching, and kind of talk about the different types of, why I had certain features or certain criteria listed on those rubrics there. And one thing that I might go ahead and share is that when I was kind of doing this, it made me think of I want to say it's called the March of Progress, which if you remember, I'm sure you've seen countless illustrations of that, where it shows the evolution of man, so to speak, or of human beings, in which, once you get towards the end, you see, a man walking upright right here. And so, that's how I kind of feel in terms of looking at the rubrics right here. I feel like I'm walking more upright in terms of my delivery and in terms of how I want to assess my students right here. But I'll go ahead and leave that for you to go ahead and decide as you take a look at these particular rubrics that I'm about to share. And if I'm not mistaken, you all will be able to actually have copies of the rubrics for yourselves. Those of you who are involved in this particular webinar or attending this particular webinar, so you can see it for yourselves and have it tangibly. If you want to print it up, that's fine. However, you'll see that this particular one, this is the earliest rubric that I could find that I had used going back to 2005. Okay, so that was 15 years ago. Goodness, I can't believe it's been that long. But going back, and this is when I was actually a part-time instructor at Fresno City College. So this is before I was a full-time instructor out at Madera Community College. And so this particular rubric right here, I can just go ahead and start off by saying that when I was a student, both for my undergraduate and graduate work, I don't have much memory, if any, of my instructors using rubrics. I have little to no memory of that. And in fact, what I'm using here was inspired by my AP Comp teacher when I was a high school senior. So I held on to that. I was able to, I remember, dig through boxes of what I had held on to, and I was able to come across this. So basically I'm using that as my inspiration. And then also too, you might notice that what I have here is the different grades right here that are listed, one for the A paper, one for the B paper. And then I'll go ahead and go on to the next screen right here where you see C and D included. But if you look under each one, you'll see that the criteria are purpose, audience, and grammar. And with that being said right there, I remember conversing with another part-time instructor at the time, and we basically kind of came to the, I remember he had mentioned that, hey, if there's two things that we want them to come across or come away with in writing, in college writing, is the idea that they're writing for a reason, that being the purpose, and that they're writing for an audience, someone besides themselves, right? That in terms of our students, that we want them to walk away with those two concepts right there. And so that's why you see purpose and audience listed right there along with grammar. And then if you're reading the bottom of the screen right here, and I did my best to do a screenshot, so hopefully it's not too blurry, but in case it is, I'll go ahead and read a little bit of it to you right here, is that it says, you may notice that there's no criteria for the F paper. That grade usually only applies if the writer has handed in the essay long past the deadline and has completely ignored the essay prompt. It may also apply to those who commit plagiarism. And if I skip over to the next paragraph right here, you'll see for yourself that I go ahead and make the comment that, are you concerned that my criteria are subjective? To some degree it is. When it comes to reading an essay written for any discipline, it's not the same as correcting a math test by Scantron. And then I go ahead and, further in, I just go ahead and say, that I'm a fair-minded person. I will always explain what I see as working and lacking in any one of your papers. And so hopefully you kind of see how this is all kind of listed right here. And I used this rubric for all of the essay assignments. So there was no distinction between, if they had written essay 1 or essay 4, I was always going to I always referred to this particular rubric right here. And you can see right here that there's no variation. So it's kind of used as a standard, or it's being used as sort of an absolute, if you will, because it's transcending all of the different papers, or it's being applied to all the different papers that the students will submit. Now, this particular one right here comes from 2008. And so what I found right here, this particular rubric is one that comes from just before I started teaching at Madera Community College. And so technically I'm still part-time right here, but this was from the summer of 2008. And so with that said right here, you'll notice that there's boxes. And so obviously the layout is different right here. There's a box for additional comments. And then the criteria are different right here. And there's a breakdown of points for the format, language use, and content. And I'll show the content in just a minute. It happens to be the next slide. But you'll see how this is much different from what we saw with 2005. So 3 years difference. And there's a difference in terms of the criteria, in terms of the layout, in terms of providing a breakdown of points right here. The addition of the additional comments right here, or the inclusion of additional comments here. And I'm going ahead and going to the next page right here so you can see for yourself the content page. And then you'll see, of course, that there's the inclusion of a grading scale right here that I had as an instructor. So that way students would be able to determine, like, among the total points where it ends up. And if you're wondering what led to my, my changes right here, or the revisions that I've made, what I have here is one thing that differed when I was reviewing these rubrics right here. One thing that I noticed that was different is that I was working for the University of Phoenix, and I started doing that back in 2006. And so in 2008, I was still working for them, teaching some classes for them. And they actually provide rubrics for their courses. I mean, you're welcome. And so what I went ahead and did is I altered this and used it for my English classes right here that I taught over at Fresno City College, as well as at College of the Sequoias at the time. Although I stopped teaching at College of the Sequoias in the spring, 2008 was my last semester there. But you'll see right here that I kind of have noticed that this layout almost seems more like a ledger, or kind of is reminiscent of a ledger. And I remember ledgers from when I used to take accounting classes, because I was originally contemplating becoming an accountant before I became an English major. But you'll see again that it's kind of got that layout right there. And I would also say that it makes sense in many ways because of the University of Phoenix. Many of their majors tend to be more business oriented, I would say. And that's not to disparage University of Phoenix, because my experience teaching there actually gave me some good skills, such as, of course, the rubric that you're seeing and being able to create a rubric, but also too, I would say that I had never created a PowerPoint prior to teaching at University of Phoenix. So again, that experience turned out to be, there were some positive, there were some things that I could take away from University of Phoenix that I would say were positive. And so I don't mean to disparage it in any way, shape, or form when I say that I used to, teach courses as part of it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move on right here, and you'll see that the 2010 rubric, what it has here is the, a different layout. We still have boxes right here, but you see columns that are listed right here where it says excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement. And I still have a column listed for comments that's blank, that's meant for me to go ahead and fill in, but you'll see the scoring range for the different, for the ones that say excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement. So I'm going ahead and trying to distinguish among the different categories or classifications that you would have for those categories of format, language use, and content, which you'll see on the next slide right here. And in fact, I might just go ahead and switch to the next slide here. And so I should point out that with these rubrics right here, that the 3 rubrics that you've just seen, they all fit on one page, single-sided. And so, so that it's all on one side of a page right there, or of a sheet of paper. Of course, it's broken up here because of the screenshot that I was doing right here. I was trying to do it as best as I could so that way it would be, you know, readable for all of you. But you can kind of see right here that, of course, you know, again, I'd mentioned that there's the range, that there's classifications in terms of the labeling. And I would credit, you know, and of course we have more descriptive language in terms of what would be considered excellent or satisfactory right there. And I went ahead and, you know, in reviewing for this webinar right here, I realized that my influence was from a book called Teaching Unprepared Students by Kathleen Gabriel. And so that's what led to me going ahead and having this different layout right here. So again, you see kind of these different things that are influencing me, different external ideas that I'm bringing forth to the rubrics and determining, okay, this is why I want to do this, or this is why I want to do that right here. But I believe Kathleen Gabriel had referred to a website, I want to say it's irubric.com, in terms of being able to design a rubric. And so that's why I'm having it, you know, as a layout in the way that it is right here, you know, with these boxes, with these columns, and with the descriptive language that I've gone ahead and included right here. Now, jumping ahead to 2016 right here, you'll see that this actually right here is worth noting because, excuse me, I had mentioned that all of them had been, you know, single-sided, so imagining them on one side of the page right here, but instead of portrait, I switched to landscape right here for it to accommodate, you know, the boxes. And then what you're seeing right here, when you see both the this slide and the next slide right here, it's actually double-sided, so that way it's 2 pages instead of 1. But you'll see that there's a difference right here now in the criteria where I'm saying content, organization, conventions. And then you'll see that I have effective, adequate, inadequate right there. And so there's a couple of influences going on right there. I would point out is that I'm drawing from a department rubric that I came across, Madera Community College, which happens to be the newest college in the state of, the newest community college in the state of California. Woohoo. Was for many years actually part of Reedley College, so it was an off-campus site. So I was using the Reedley College English department's rubric for what I for my basis or for my inspiration right here. But you know, Madera Community College, we're our own college now, for the record. In fact, that just happened over the summer. And so anyway, just letting you know that that's where I'm kind of drawing my, or that's where I'm drawing my inspiration from. You'll see that the categories are still there. Effective and superior share the same column. And then also I should point out that I was trying to do like effective, adequate, inadequate, that I'm trying to use the verbiage of the my time as an AP reader. I was a reader for the AP Comp exam from 2007 to 2012. And so that's kind of part of the verbiage that they use in terms of their holistic scoring. So once again, you'll see that I have the content, organization, and then I switch to the next slide right here, which you would see on the second page. I was also trying to do it in terms of priority or in terms of emphasis right there. So in other words, trying to point out that content is more important, is a more important idea, what's on the global or conceptual as being more important than what is, say, for example, in relation to formatting or in relation to, you know, just proper grammar. Not to say that those aren't important, but trying to say that, you know, having such things as a thesis statement, having support for the thesis statement, having purpose, that those conveying purpose throughout the essay, the development of ideas, trying to emphasize that that's more important. In fact, if I go back really quickly to the previous slide right here, you'll notice that content among the three categories right there is actually the most, has the most points right there in terms of 40 points as opposed to 30 points for organization, 30 points for conventions right there. Okay, and then finally, I want to go ahead and bring it to one of my more recent rubrics right here. This is actually taken from spring 2020 right here. And so this is fine right here. And so you'll see, of course, a difference right here, although you'll see a similarity in terms of what's there. Content, organization, conventions are still there. You'll also see that although the layout is different, this is still double-sided, I should point out, but we're back to portrait. So I had mentioned earlier that the 2016 rubric was landscape, but we're back to portrait now, in case anyone was wondering. But this right here, you'll see that I have a box, a rather large box right here for comments that's meant for free writing. If I were in a face-to-face course, then, I would be writing in that particular box right there. I would be using my own handwriting here. But since we've had to switch to virtual because of the pandemic, and because, I do teach classes online as well, I use Canvas for my learning management system. And so with that being said, I just, do a free response is what I do right here, although I still provide the rubrics to my students. But you might notice if we focus on these particular categories, and I believe you can see my cursor right here as I move it from, one box to the next right here. It says SLO 1.2, so that's pointing to the student learning outcomes, and that's referencing I'm sorry, not the rubric, but the syllabus, the course syllabus. And that's referencing, of course, the idea that what's listed there are the student learning outcomes, just as I had gone ahead and listed some outcomes for this particular presentation at the beginning. I include the student learning outcomes in my syllabus. I know that might be, a debate, for some people do that, some people don't. I go ahead and I do that right there. That's a whole other debate. But basically the SLO 1.2 and 1.3 right there that you're seeing, SLO 3, that's in reference to certain skills that they're supposed to come away with after completing English 1A. And English 1A is our freshman composition course at Madera Community College. So I just thought I'd point that out right there. Also, what we have here is the different columns right here. I mean, the scores or the scoring range is still included right here. But we have excellent job, good work, fulfills task, or not yet. And I should point out that those particular ones are meant to, and I would credit my involvement with the California Acceleration Project, also just referred to simply as CAP. I would refer to my involvement with that as being, an influence in terms of trying to promote more of a growth mindset by saying not yet, as opposed to saying inadequate, because by saying not yet, that would, leave room for improvement, or go ahead and encourage maybe in a rewrite that students could go ahead and improve upon what they have there. So once again, you see this for content, organization, and you'll see this again for conventions as well. And again, you see the column that's there. And I should point out that for the couple other rubrics, of course, there's the grading scale has been included before. But, usually with the additional final comments, I usually include that, or usually what I write in there is when a rewrite is due, if they're going to go ahead and do a rewrite for, to improve their essay grade. But also down here where it says 100, I include, the number of points total from the different columns right there, from the different categories of content, organization, conventions right there. So that way they have a grand total. They have it broken down, but they also have the grand total of points that they've gotten for that specific essay that they've done, that out of class essay. All right. So hopefully, let me go ahead and just move on to the this part right here, which I had mentioned. There's a work cited here, so I have the different sources that I went ahead and cited earlier and referred to earlier with Feldman and Inouye. And then this is the second slide that has it right here with Mertler, Potham, Spandl. So, you know, and once again, you should be able to, you know, if you wanted to see this, I believe you'd have access to the PowerPoint afterwards, but also if you were to watch this video again, and then you can go straight to this and, you know, fast forward straight to these particular slides if you were wanting to look at any of these sources for yourselves right here. So anyway, I'll just go ahead and that's what we have right there. And I guess I'll just go ahead and open it up for if there's any questions on anything. And Jill, I guess, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was Jill or Kristen who was going to be doing the Q&A part right here, but we'll go ahead and switch that over.
Yes, thank you. That was great. We'll go over a few questions. Let's see. You mentioned adding the rubric as free response questions to Canvas since going virtual. Can you expand a bit more on your process for this?
Yeah. Well, Canvas has, you know, Canvas does work with rubrics, and there's a box for you to go ahead and check in which it has where you can go ahead and type in what your criterion is, as well as what your as well as whether or not you wanted to do free response. And so you go ahead and you check that, and then you go ahead and save it. Although you have to kind of be careful with Canvas, I've noticed. You want to make sure that you take care of that particular rubric prior to the rubric feature, prior to letting the students have access to that link right there. Because otherwise it can be kind of messy. And sometimes what I end up doing is, if I ever come up upon any kind of problems with that, is I just simply write it out in the comments. There's a comments feature, and I just simply go ahead and write out actually content : and then I do my free response, organization : free response, convention : you know, free response, whatever that would happen to be, having a breakdown of points, you know, for each one of those particular columns right there. And so I hope that answers your question and helps to, you know, clarify what hopefully I understood the question right. Hopefully I answered that question, you know, fully right there just now. Thank you.
Okay, and we have a few more coming in. You mentioned an analytical versus holistic rubric, but it appears you only did holistic. Can you comment to this?
Well, I mean, in terms of, I would say that probably I would say probably I have more analytic as I went on right here. I know that it seems quite holistic, probably from 2005 to 2016. 2020, the rubric that was for 2020 was probably the most analytic among them because it just has certain statements, and then it's going ahead and having it there. But I mean, if you do see the idea of it being holistic, I would probably say that, you know, I guess that's a good point that you're bringing up in terms of saying that what I have is strictly holistic, or if you're seeing everything being holistic. I would probably say that with that being said, the idea of the holistic is, I think, rather helpful personally to being able to tie the ideas to something greater, or trying to tie the ideas, even with it, my 2020 rubric, to the to my student learning outcomes. You know, what it is that, you know, we probably generally would say makes for good essay writing, because, you know, certain features such as transitions or having adequate use of citations, you know, those are things that are not exclusive to, people that are at Madera Community College, but, I imagine, and I imagine we're getting people from across the country here, but let's say New York State, I imagine that if there's anyone here from New York State who is, grading essays or whatever, that they would probably have, how should I say, that they probably look for the same features. And so that's probably why why it is actually probably holistic. I hadn't really thought about that there, but, hopefully that answers the question or answers the response in terms of what we have right there. But thank you for that observation.
And then what is the advantage of having one description under the criteria rather than having descriptors for each level? Excellent, good, etc.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a great question. And, these are some solid questions that are being posed my way here. In terms of the advantage, I would say that it probably it's not as overwhelming to the students. I noticed that quite a few people, I've had a couple of colleagues that when they saw like what my rubrics look like now, because I've had some colleagues look at this and, look at this particular presentation here, but when, that basically the observation is that it's a little bit more inviting. So I guess I could see that there's some advantages and disadvantages. There's advantages in that, it's a little bit more inviting and it's not as overwhelming to the particular student right there. Whereas, but then again, there might be the disadvantage of not being able to pinpoint more specifically, this is what this is how you would make it a little bit more, this is how it would be more excellent right here, or this would be excellent content or adequate content right here. So there might be that disadvantage right there with the student. I think that by doing that, it just allows for, the chance for me to be able to write in and have more room. It also gives me more room, I guess, on a practical level. It gives me more room to write in what I want to the student directly and to personalize it directly to what the student is doing. And sometimes what I've done as well, if I'm not mistaken, is that I've gone ahead and I've put a little check mark by whether or not it would be excellent or whether it would be adequate right there. So that way the student kind of knows. But they would also be able to pick up on that too by the scoring range that is there for like excellent or good work. Right there, they would be able to kind of be able to put 2 and 2 together. Like if they had gotten 33 out of 40 or whatever, they would know that that is, good work in relation to content right there. So there's that, there's, that benefit right there that, you're kind of allowing your students to be able to kind of put 2 and 2 together and maybe not so much direct them too much or be too directive in terms of what conclusion they can come to with that.
Do rubrics need a long description for each area that you are assessing? Do you find students read these?
And I think that that's probably another reason that kind of goes, kind of leads me away from the descriptions or from the long descriptions that are provided that I originally had, is that, the idea that maybe students may not read them. I mean, I would go through it with them as a class, but, when I introduce the rubric or when I'm introducing the rubric along with the prompt slash, topic, the essay assignment right there, I'll go through the rubrics with them. But in terms of having that feeling that maybe, and being more realistic and practical and saying that students aren't going to maybe read through the entirety of it on their own. And that way, kind of having it is almost unnecessary right there, and maybe even overwhelming to the students right there. And that's why kind of getting rid of those descriptions or those lengthy descriptions is probably better off for the students.
And then how do you share the graded rubric with students? Do you meet with your students to review the rubric together and discuss comment/feedback?
Good question. I've done that before, where, you know, I have a conference with students. I've done it both ways where maybe in conferences, I've done it where I've graded it right there with the student with me, where we go through the essay together and then we come to a grade together in terms of what the particular essay, you know, how the essay is overall. But in some other cases, I've gone ahead and I've just simply, you know, I have students attach the rubric to the essay itself, and then when I return the essays, I just get it back to them, and it's there in writing. And then I just tell them if they have questions to go ahead and come up to me and, you know, pose those questions to me about anything in terms of how it was graded or if any of my particular comments there. So, you know, I think there's value in either one, and being able to either meet with them one-on-one to go ahead and go over it. But there's also, you know, maybe some value in just making sure that it's attached to the essay and just handing it back to them.
Your growth mindset terms seem to be for the grades of A, B, C, and F. Which growth mindset term might you recommend for a grade of D? Perhaps could use some more work. Not sure if this term would promote enough of the growth mindset. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's actually, if I'm not mistaken, that's what I had in terms of the not yet, because not yet was more of, in fact, if I were to go back to my slide, I believe that was like a D or lower in terms of not yet. In terms of promoting the growth mindset, there might be other phrases. I mean, and if people come up with better phrases or phrases that they feel more comfortable with, by all means, please go with them. I don't believe that that's an absolute. Maybe there's a better phrase that I'm thinking that you might be able to think of that I can't. And, you know, and I think if anything, you know, with my rubrics, if anything else, hopefully that would kind of, I mean, you're more than welcome to copy as much of the rubric as you want from what you see with mine. You're welcome to make any modifications that you know, come across. I think that would be perfectly fine as well. And so, but I believe the not yet is the one that I've seen most commonly used in terms of something that would qualify as a D or F in terms of trying to promote that growth mindset.
Can rubrics be used in place of marginal comments on a draft? They seem more user-friendly and time-saving.
I do both. I try not to have too much, you know, or sometimes what I do as well, or what I've gotten to doing in recent year or in the past several years, is I might go ahead and put a number like in the column. So I might write down a 1 with a circle, and then on the back of the page, because usually, of course, when a student submits an essay, you know, it's only single-sided, so that means one side, of course, is blank. I'll go ahead and, you know, write down a much longer description, because the margins can be a little bit confining in terms of how you can respond. So that's one thing that I do, and hopefully that makes sense what I just described right now. But in terms of being able to do it in place of, I personally wouldn't do that, but I mean, you know, if that works for someone else, I think that could be the case. And maybe with my rubric, that is 2020, the 2020 rubric right there, I could certainly see where, you know, having, you know, that large space for comments right there would be able to allow for students to go ahead and access and to go ahead and respond or see the response from the instructor and comments, rather than just simply seeing it there in the margins.
Your 2020 rubric does not say anything about late papers or plagiarized papers. How do you deal with these issues now?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's probably in reference to what they had seen in terms of the in the other rubrics or in the years prior. And so I credit whoever had that question right there as being very observant right there. That's a great point. No, I just usually verbalize it, or I just leave it up to what I have in the syllabus in terms of, well, in terms of late papers, I figure I cover that under my policy reminders. In terms of late papers and plagiarism, I have that under my policy reminders in my prompt. So a prompt and a rubric, the rubrics, you've seen the prompts, which I don't include, but the prompts go ahead and include information about the topic, about the deadline, some policy reminders related to, late papers, plagiarism, and then something that I offer, as well as a checklist in terms of, these are things that you want to make sure that you've taken care of before you submit the paper, such as making sure that it's, the appropriate length, that, if you're going to submit it, that you've submitted it as a Word or rich text format document. So yeah, so I in some ways kind of believe that I have that covered already in my prompt. So, not needing to repeat it on the rubric right there, I think has pretty much been the conclusion I've come to there.
When do you provide your students with access to these rubrics? Have you found it helpful to share at the beginning of the semester or a certain period of time before the paper is due?
Yeah, whenever I share my prompts and rubrics together is what I usually do. And so, and if you're kind of wondering, usually I give my students about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks prior, basically 2 to 3 weeks prior to when the deadline is for the particular essay is when I go ahead and I get out the prompt and rubric for the particular assignment to my students. And that's when I go over them as well.
So then along with that, do you use the same rubric for all your papers, or do you use different rubrics for different types of papers?
Oh, yeah, thank you for that comment right there, and or for that question right there. Now, I do use different rubrics for, the different papers. But in all honesty, there hasn't been a humongous, or there's not a huge, I would say, difference between, certain aspects, because, my belief is that, certain things, because speaking as a community college instructor, I want my students, for example, to be able to write beyond, let's say, the 5-paragraph essay, right? And having, beyond the 5-paragraph structure. So with that being said, there's certain verbiage that I always include in relation to that, but depending on the task that I'm asking them to do, because I might be asking them to do one thing in one essay, and then in, the very next essay, I might be asking them to do something else, like to provide, or to be working with a, full-length text, as opposed to what they might have done with the previous essay right there. So yeah, I mean, usually there are some differences. It's not like the 2005 rubric where I just say, here's the rubric, and this is what we're going to use for all the essay assignments. I do provide different rubrics for the different essay assignments. There is what I do.
In your opinion, what are the benefits of using a portrait versus landscape rubric?
Oh, that's well, I guess there's the benefit of not having to turn the page, like, having to switch it over like this right here. So, that way it's just kind of straightforward. It's right there. They can kind of see it very easily right there for themselves, I would say, is kind of the benefit of the portrait as opposed to the landscape. Then again, I mean, that's not to completely say landscape is wrong. I mean, if somebody, goes ahead and has it that way, I mean, there is, a little bit more that they can write out because obviously, because of the dimensions that are being worked with right there. But for me, I think that it would probably aesthetically work a little bit better for the students, because that way they wouldn't be able to have, or they wouldn't have to turn the page, sideways to be able to read it right there for themselves.
What were the turning points for needing to update each rubric you mentioned?
Oh, goodness. I think that probably every semester or every other semester, there's always something that, I think occurs, or something that, I just go ahead and I say to myself, I need to revise the rubrics right here. I can't maybe, I'm probably easier in terms of stating the influences rather than being able to answer the turning points. I mean, that's a wonderful question. Don't hear me wrong. Um, I would probably say that, just looking at it, and just maybe saying to myself, am I really kind of, maybe asking myself that question periodically, is this really, am I really getting across to my students, what they need to do in terms of their papers, in terms of how they write and what they should be writing? Am I really kind of conveying that, am I articulating that as best as I can to my students? And, and the other thing too is, if I'm articulating it, are they receiving it? Because there's a difference between obviously what's being delivered and how it's being, taken in, so to speak. So wanting to see my students, and trying to put myself into the mind of my students a little bit better in terms of how I think they might be receiving that information the best.
All right, well, it looks like we're just about out of time. Thank you, Professor Ramirez, and thank you all for attending today. If you have any questions, please direct them to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com, or on the screen you can see his questions. We'll be emailing you all a link to view this webinar on demand, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.